Hey everybody, welcome to the Agency Operators podcast. Today I'm joined by Yoni Steinschreiber of Elevate Brands. How you doing, Yoni?
Good, Pasha. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm doing well, man. I'm excited about this conversation. There's a lot to talk about in this world. Data is everything in Amazon, in e-commerce, and probably everywhere. So, having the right tools and the right knowledge of how to look at them will be super critical for getting through this quarter and having a successful 2026. So before we dive into that, Yoni, I wanted to kind of ask you about your background. I know that you've had an exit. I know that you've worked in agency from a few different angles, and now you're obviously running Elevate Brands. So, what got you into the agency world? Like, what kind of inspired you to be where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start with just how I sort of got into the Amazon world and give you a little path to journey and how I got to here. Back in 2016, 2017, I was sort of fresh out of college working the corporate job. And as all of us entrepreneurs, we kind of hate working for someone else and really wanted to find something that I could do and build a business. So a good buddy of mine and I had we'd heard of a couple of different courses. At the time, it was called the Amazing Selling Machine, and so we actually started there. Sort of started taking classes. How do we source? And Amazon was a very different world back then. There were a lot of like hacks that you could do to finagle the algorithm, drive traffic up front, and sort of these easy to use launch plans. And so it sort of gave us a guideline and a tool to build a brand. We started, both of us, we loved the outdoor space. We're big outdoors people. I still am. So we wanted to get into sort of an outdoor niche and started in the outdoor blanket space. Very quickly saw success, expanded our product line, and within about 2.5 years, scaled up to about $3.5 million in revenue. During the big COVID buying boom, we were able to exit. And I used that experience from building this brand and really understanding the back end of Amazon. Again, back in 2019, 2020, very different world, but was able to sort of leverage that experience to get myself a job in, an Amazon ad agency. Well, actually, it was an ad agency. I was really working on the Amazon side. Worked my way up to the director of Amazon marketing there, and saw some things that I really didn't like in the general agency space and thought that I could do better. Most of all was, number one, attention to care. Really seeing that a lot of these big ad agencies throw media buyers that have 6 to 9 months of experience onto your account and are running all of your PPC and making strategic calls for brands that are seasoned and paying you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars a month. And it felt like there was a lot of churn and burn, both internally, putting a lot of pressure on young folk who were just entering the space, and also on the client facing side, not hitting the expectations. A lot of agencies get very broad and don't get very deep. So I wanted to create a model that was different. Coming from sort of that controller and founder background, I saw the need to understand Amazon, not just from a marketing perspective, but a holistic perspective. Understanding cash flow, understanding inventory constraints. There's a ton of operations, as you know, that go on sort of in the background of the Amazon world that's very different than just being a media buyer and trying to generate as much revenue as possible. So incorporating those sort of aspects into the business, that's where I really took off from Elevate. Started as a contractor and just sort of worked for a couple of brands. And as I kept getting referrals, started hiring, building an agency, and now we're an agency really that focuses on CPG brands, and we bring brands to life on Amazon as sort of the ethos of what we do.
Very cool. And by the way, congrats on that exit during the pandemic. That's
Thank
probably
you.
the best time ever in history to exit, right?
Absolutely, and very true, very true.
Yeah. And blankets is a very cool niche. I think it's pretty competitive, I imagine, but maybe if you start early enough and make a name for yourself, then you become the ones that are pushing the new guys out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that basically at this point, to be fully transparent, all niches are sort of saturated to some extent at this point. And so, and we can talk a little bit about the brand building side of things, but huge part of Amazon now is not just finding, obviously, doing product research, understanding the market, finding sort of those gaps is important, for brand building on Amazon, What's more important is really building a brand on Amazon that resonates with a customer, driving traffic and converting, right? How do you differentiate? How do we bring those unique selling propositions from a product lens to the forefront of the buyer's awareness? And I think that, there's this conceptual idea that, there are these sort of niches that you can sort of fall into now and find where there's gaps in the market. And the truth is that, yeah, maybe like, in these very, very specific niches, there are some spaces that can be occupied that are currently not, by having, minor differences here and there. But what really is the most important thing, and I think this is, true for omnichannel and holistic marketing in general, is you got to build a brand. You got to build a brand that resonates. You got to build something that sticks with people, right? Unique products, unique selling propositions, but also something that evokes. And that's something that we've really excelled in at Elevate specifically.
Yeah, it's sort of difficult these days, when companies, they're following the old playbook and they want to come to you and say, "Hey, could you help me grow XYZ product line that, everybody else is selling?" And it's very hard to take on a customer knowing what we know, right? And say, "Yeah, we're going to try," even though we know it's going to fail. So I agree with you. I think it's important to be as transparent as possible, and work with companies who really are solving a problem and offering a solution that people actually are looking for, whether it's better quality, better price, better IP, or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are top priorities for us. And the other thing, kind of what you were mentioning about the way that you saw operations happening internally at the other places that you were working. I think that's true of all larger organizations to some extent. I think there are different ways that large organizations grow, as long as you kind of maintain that kind of like lean and mean ethos, right? But you can kind of grow that way too. So it's not to say kind of like blanket statement on large agencies in general, but even talking to Amazon, I've discovered that there's a lot of this operating in silos that's happening, where you just have media buying is a media buying department and that's it, right? And content is content, and they don't communicate. And when I heard that, Amazon operates this way, like I understand, like for the incentive of the teams to do well and not blame the other team for their performance, that's why they do that. So it's very like numbers driven. But
Yep.
for the actual customers, I feel like that could be difficult, for the reason of everything is interconnected, whether you like it or not. And so looking at things from that perspective is like, all right, well, how can we frame this in a way where content and advertising and your numbers and the inventory and the deals and all of that kind of syncs together as one thing? And how do we pay attention to all those levers at the same time, know when to pull them, communicate to you about what you're doing outside of Amazon, and deals, and kind of how the things are being run on the grand scheme of the brand, I think is the
Yeah.
important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think strategic oversight is massive. I mean, we see the frustrations I'm sure that we all have, right? From, as you said, sort of like a silo, they sort of hold their own teams accountable, and then there's never sort of cross accountability when we're dealing with cases, right? Whether that's brand registry or seller central and trying to figure out how they communicate, or it's catalog and they're transferring to different teams. And we as sellers, agency owners, et cetera, struggle with imagine if we were the client, sort of, right? It's like there's the communication sucks because we don't know where it's at, where those things are. So what we did internally, actually, Elevate, for this problem specifically, is we created a system that was a little different. As opposed to having a PPC department, a content and creative department, and a strategy and a case catalog department, what we do is we actually have a pod system. And so what we do is every single pod works on a multitude of brands together, but there's 3 people to a pod. And so what that does is creates sort of this cohesive feedback loop between the 3 of them, that works on each brand. So we have the brand manager and high level strategist, right, as sort of the spearhead. And then we have a graphic designer and a PPC person all in the same pod. And so those 3 people will work on all of their brands together. What that does is they have strategic meetings where the feedback loop is such that, hey, PPC is going to creative and saying, hey, click-through rates are down. We've been seeing, struggling as there's been more competition over the last 6-12 months. We're seeing click-through rates continue to go down. Let's really focus on building something that improves our click-through rates, right? So now they go to strategy. Strategy focuses, okay, we're going to update, we're going to do some split, managed experiments for main image. We're going to do some price testing and work with the brand on price testing. We're going to do a multitude of things to work on the click-through rate, right? And create sort of that feedback loop. And similar with like conversion rate, right? Hey, we're seeing conversion rate drop for X, Y, and Z reason. Here's what we're seeing, yada, yada. Great. Let's actually create a strategy around this on the creative side to make sure that when we're targeting on the PPC, one example is, we have hypotheses when we launch with new brands that these are the types of keywords that are going to work from a PPC side, right? And then we go in, we start uncovering data. We're like, hey, this is actually not at all what we thought. What actually really works is such and such. And so what we can do is actually say, hey, let's not focus on the selling points that we originally thought from the creative side, from the bullet points, from the top title, et cetera. Let's actually focus on the keywords that are working on the PPC side. So we go and we iterate on the back end. And so what that does is create sort of that feedback, iterate, test loop, and constantly sort of evolving listings and brands as they go through that. And it creates a much more cohesive strategy as opposed to having sort of these siloed segments. Because like you said, right, it is so, so important that all of these aspects of the business are working together, right? From a front-facing Amazon side, but also the back-end side, right? As you know, right, when Black Friday, Cyber Monday is coming up and we're creating deals and the brand is having inventory issues because everyone's sending into Amazon and everyone's buying right now and creating POs and sort of all of these things. So how do we create strategies that work with the brand? What are their needs, their cash flow situations, things like that? And it's so important. And a lot of that gets lost in the general ad space because I think so many of the people in the ad space are really just media buyers, as you sort of put it. And so making sure that they have a deeper understanding, a more seasoned understanding of how a business runs and how sort of the front end changes affect those back end parts of the business is really, really important and something that we make sure that we really work on with our employees internally.
I love that. That cyclical nature of your process, I think, is very powerful.
Yeah.
Because it does pass through all the different departments and kind of comes back to the client. And okay, this is this round. This is what we found. So it also keeps the client in the loop. And I think that's another very important part where there's things that you're doing in the background, and you might actually be doing a great job, but as long as the client is kind of in the dark about things, then so having great reporting and being very clear and having good communication, it's the lifeblood of every relationship, really.
Absolutely.
So
Communication is everything.
It is, yeah. And being strong on the internal side and on the client side, making sure that everything that's happening on both ends is reflecting evenly and in a balanced way.
And I think it's true that if you're doing a good job, there's absolutely nothing that you should ever be hiding from a client, right? Transparent reporting, transparent understanding. If you're putting your best foot forward and following practices that are healthy and optimized and they're fully aligned, there's never anything that you should be hiding from a client, right?
Yeah.
And it's something, transparency is absolutely key in a partnership.
Yeah, and it's not to say that sometimes there might be a month in a report where it's like, hey, we're down this month, but we understand why. And
exactly,
I think that the important thing for people is not necessarily that we have to be month over month growing forever, but it's really that we understand what's going on in the account and the reasons for declines or increases alike. So, profits down this month. Why? Well, it's November, fourth quarter, fees are up, and you sent in all this inventory, and okay, so at least you understand what's going on, right? So I think that's the important part. And kind of speaking on the whole data thing, I know we wanted to kind of go over AMC. That is something that, you and I spent a little time at Accelerate this year. And starting last Accelerate is when the whole AMC thing became a big topic. And this year they rolled out some updates allowing AMC to be a part of Seller Central and Campaign Manager, and it's more accessible and more understandable. It's not this kind of abstract data set. So I would love to kind of ask you about ways that you guys are utilizing AMC and how you found that to be helpful to both make progress in the campaigns themselves, but also explain to clients and build greater strategies using that data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think zooming out, getting a sense of what Amazon historically provided, I think is important context to sort of what they're now providing. Things that have always sort of been on the D2C side and in Meta and in sort of all of these other sort of campaign managers. There's a lot of things that we didn't have in Amazon. So right, a lot of the things like path to purchase, right, true lifetime value of customers, being able to go and segment, create audiences outside of DSP specifically in the campaign manager was really difficult and nearly impossible, right? There were some things that you could do in sponsored display, but super limiting in terms of how we sort of could create those things. And AMC's been rolled out, as you mentioned, for a while now. I think at least about 2 years. There's been some AMC data that we can pull, maybe even more. But it was all really like creating your own UI and having SQL developers that could go in and actually create these queries to unlock this data of, from the cloud, right? Amazon would spit out, basically data lines, and you'd have to go in and figure out how to sort that. And if you're like me or you, and we don't have a computer science background and we don't have sort of the technical skill set to go through and do this, it was more difficult for smaller boutique agencies or sellers to be able to access a lot of this data that was sort of sitting back there in the Amazon Marketing Cloud. And what Amazon did, I think about 2 months ago now, maybe a little bit more, they came out with the Amazon Marketing Cloud in the Campaign Manager. And what it's done is similarly, it does use SQL, but there's a lot of preset sort of templates for how we can use these queries to unlock a lot of this data. Number one, to get data that's helpful to us in understanding, creating those strategic alignments, understanding sort of how the customer experience goes, being able to share those things with clients that I'm sure as agency owners, we've gotten the lifetime value question all the time, and we give them subscribe and save metrics and give them brand analytics, but there's been sort of limiting factors on how much do we really know about the lifetime value of your customers and things like that. Taking sort of that data and then also being able to go and utilize that data on the campaign side. So how do we actually build that in? And now we're actually able to utilize this data, these audiences, these segmentations, and we're able to actually plug them into our existing campaign, sponsored product, sponsored brand, and sponsored display in ways that we never could, right? Sponsored product was always keyword or product targeting, essentially, right? We could do top of search adjustments, we could do broad, different types of match types, things like that, but we could never give boost adjustments to anything outside of placement. And now we can give boost adjustments to audiences, to specific categories, specific groups of people. That's really, really special and something that we've never been able to do. So taking a step back, that's sort of what we're seeing. The ways that I think the real question was, how do we utilize that? So we utilize it on two sort of different ways. One is sort of the reporting side, what we intake, right? How do we actually see what the customer is going through in their customer journey on Amazon? And then two is now, how do we actually implement these different things and actually push it out to the customer, right? So how we're bidding, how we're moving as well. So on the reporting side, path to purchase, path to conversion, that's been huge for us, right? Really understanding. Now for brands that are using, full sort of multi-funnel channels on the Amazon side, right? Sponsored product, sponsored brand, sponsored display, DSP, things like that. What we can do is actually we can look at path to conversion, right? So, okay, great. We're seeing from an attribution side, right? For example, on a sponsored product side, it's a 14-day attribution window, right? But maybe someone went from a sponsored product to a sponsored brand or from a sponsored brand campaign to a sponsored product campaign, got retargeted on DSP twice, then purchased, right? We're able to see that path to purchase. And so what we'll see is from an attribution side, sometimes the ads that were really important to building that model gave the overall lift to a total sales, didn't get the attribution to that specific ad. So historically we've been like, this ad's not really working, the ROAS isn't great, whatever. But what we're able to do now is say, okay, great, here's the path to purchase that we're seeing. What happens when we remove one of those aspects? And maybe that's an aspect that's not getting a lot of the attribution. So ROAS seems low and something historically we would have gotten rid of. But what we're seeing is actually, okay, when we remove one of those aspects to the path to purchase, we're actually seeing a huge decline in sales overall holistically, and it's contributing to a loss in ROAS in some of these other places, right? On the DSP side, on the retargeting side, on whatever it is in that path to purchase. And so that's been a huge thing that we've been able to utilize on that side. And the second thing on the lifetime is on the reporting is the lifetime value. And that has been really huge for us. We focus, although not only, we're not exclusive to, but we really focus on building CPG brands on Amazon. And in the consumer space, having lifetime value, understanding repeat purchases, understanding our audiences, that's the biggest advantage to having CPG, right? you're not selling a one-off item, you're selling an item that can be purchased over and over and over again. And how do we get customer loyalty, right? And so that's been a huge part of it. And so we're actually able to segment out and see what is the lifetime value for specific ASINs, what is the lifetime value for specific brands, and then what is the lifetime value for on specific path to purchase, things like that. That's been huge for us, not just for our internal reporting to understand, but also to share with the client, because as I said, we've had clients for years asking for true lifetime value, and it's been really hard to give that data. Now it's given us an unlocked access for us that gives us a really good understanding of how are we actually lifting the ceiling, not just on, as we talked about, attribution, this initial purchase attribution, but what do these ads actually do to the holistic aspect of the business, right? How many repeat purchases are we getting? What does this look like from an organic sales side? That's been a huge lever as well that we're able to pull and share with the clients.
I love that. Yeah, the whole LTV, cost of acquisition thing, has been, I think, revolutionary for maybe the less savvy e-commerce brands, or kind of drivers, maybe people who don't have like a dedicated department or understand, like, we've all heard, what's the ACost this month, or if they're extra sophisticated, the conversation is around tacos, right? But when you start bringing in cost of acquisition versus lifetime value, you start building out that more wide scope of, okay, no, maybe it makes sense to invest more into ads and even spend a higher ACost, right? If we're seeing that it really does convert to lifetime value via subscribe and save or what have you, or cross promotion to other products. And then, yeah, the whole DSP thing adds another layer of complexity to it, and sometimes there is that kind of double dipping. So it's nice to see everything under one roof.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives just so much clarity, I think, that people have been lacking for a long time. And then the other part of it, obviously, outside of just the insights that we're able to take, is really the audience building. This has been huge for us. So what that actually looks like is, and this is tangible for anyone that's running, has campaign manager and has access, is going in and actually building custom audiences, right? So there's a multitude of audiences, similar to how we, on DSP or sponsored display that we used to see, right? There's category audiences, right? Interest-based audiences, things like that. But now we can get way more refined. And this is what we utilize a lot is, we're able to sort of segment and create if and then rules, which gives us a lot of flexibility in figuring out what works, right? And using the insights that we get from sort of the path to conversion, lifetime value, things like that, we're actually able to go and then create audiences that directly reflect sort of the insights that we're getting from them. So for example, we're able to create audiences that, are focused on customers who have purchased from our brand but haven't in the last 90 days, right? So, conceptually, that's like people who are falling off, right? How do we give them? And we can, sort of do this, which has been really cool for us, is we use a lot of these in conjunction with things like brand tailored promotions, where we've had these audiences that Amazon automatically, syncs out. We've never been able to drive ads specifically to them to say, hey, you have a discount waiting for you because you abandoned cart, or you are falling off from, our high level audiences. And so we create these promotions, and then we're able to specifically direct not just sponsored display campaigns or DSP campaigns, but sponsored brand and sponsored product campaigns to these people as well, right? With bid adjustments. So what that looks like, similar to placement bid adjustments that we've always had access to, what we can do is we go and we build these audience segments in the AMC section of the campaign manager. And there's a ton of preset audiences. I highly recommend everyone just go and check it out. Super easy to build, really basic audiences. And then we're able to actually take those audiences, put them into sponsored product and sponsored brand campaigns, and then we're able to give bid adjustments. So what that looks like sometimes is even super simple, like low hanging fruits. It's like build an auto campaign, right? This is sort of like the most basic campaign. Build an auto campaign and put 5 or 10 cent bids, super low. Let Amazon's algorithm do the job, but then layer in some of these specific audiences, and you can do a number of them and give 500% boosts. I think it goes up to 900% boost, but 900% boost, where all of a sudden, when you have someone who's purchased from the brand and not in the last 90 days, they're being served for any of these keyword or product targets that are similar. They're now seeing your placement. And so what we're seeing is that, if someone falls into that campaign, or gets an impression from that campaign, we're talking about 5 or 10 cent clicks. It's super cheap. But if we get those high intent, potential customers that are in there based on the audiences we built out, we're willing to spend a lot more money. And we've seen really good, that's, obviously a really basic example, but we've seen a lot of these audiences really, really show some tremendous life. And they're going to improve your overall KPIs if we're able to layer them in a smart and thoughtful way.
That's a great way to increase the LTV. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so you guys handle the advertising, the content, all of the management.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're holistic. So we really focus on, as I said, building holistic strategies. We have a few PPC only clients, but I would say over 85% of our clients now are on the holistic management. What that looks like is building your entire creative suite. So listing images, A+ content, brand story, storefront, etc. Focusing on the strategy, so working internally on the inventory management. We take your cost of goods sold up front. We understand your margins so that when we can, when we're scaling up or scaling down, we understand what our tacos, goals need to be and things like that. And then obviously we do the full PPC management as well. So we really focus on building a holistic strategy on Amazon. We like to act as sort of like your Amazon arm. So you don't have to have an Amazon media buyer and an operations person dedicated to Amazon and a finance person dedicated to Amazon. And understanding that, we're really able to outsource as sort of like an all-in-one.
Yeah, and if everything is just under one roof, then you can just go and focus on other parts of your business, right? And it's like,
absolutely.
With also, I find that with these kind of offers, right, like try to build out a team in-house to do all of these things, you have to hire so many people, right? It ends up being far more expensive and just and costly and everything, resource-wise, time-wise. Yoni, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how could they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. I believe that it's in the event here, but it's LinkedIn.com. My in profile is Y Steinschreiber, Yoni Steinschreiber. And then you can also find us on our website. That's Elevate, ELEV8, the number, -brands.com. We do free audits as well for any brand that's interested. So that, we can give you a sense of how we think you can improve your brand on Amazon as well.
Awesome. Check them out. Yeah, awesome. Yoni, thank you for coming on and sharing your nuggets of gold here, nuggets of wisdom. Really appreciate the conversation here. And yeah, thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you, Pasha. I really appreciate the time.
All right. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye for now.